Hello, I'm Alma Angeles. We're moving to the next stage of the pandemic, and as the world resets to the new normal, we find ourselves seeking the right balance between health and livelihood, constantly adjusting the boundaries between liberty and responsibility. Here are tonight's news. First, hundreds of troops were deployed to the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul early Friday after a fourth night of rioting over police brutality against African Americans, left hundreds of shops damaged and a police station on fire. Take a look. Demonstrations raged from New York to Los Angeles and from Atlanta, where police cruisers were set ablaze, to Washington, where protesters faced off with Secret Service agents outside the White House still. Authorities imposed a curfew on Friday in Minneapolis after 3 nights of violent protests left parts of the city in flames. But the protesters defiantly remained on the streets, sometimes dodging tear gas canisters fired into crowds by police. Demonstrators clashed with law enforcement, looted stores. They set fires to shops and a construction site overnight Wednesday in the busy Lake Street corridor of Minneapolis, and they were met with police tear gas and rubber bullets. One person died of a gunshot wound, and police were reportedly investigating whether he was shot by a store owner. Some stores, including Minneapolis-based Target, afterwards announced they would close multiple locations as the U.S. Postal Service suspended service to some areas, and bus services were also discontinued through the weekend in parts of the city. Meanwhile, several hundred people angrily protesting the death of African-American George Floyd in police custody in Minneapolis rallied outside the White House on Friday in tense scenes that have spread to several cities across the country. President Trump was in the mansion during the protests that converged on a park across the street from the White House, where several dozen Secret Service agents lined the barricades. Demonstrators wielded signs saying, "Stop killing us," and called for justice for George Floyd, who died on Monday after a white police officer pressed his knee down on the neck of an unarmed and handcuffed Floyd for several minutes. Serious clashes were largely averted outside the White House, and demonstrators marched down Washington streets towards the U.S. Capitol. Protests had also spread to New York, Houston, Atlanta, Detroit, Las Vegas, San Jose, and Memphis. Meanwhile, police arrested a CNN crew broadcasting live from the U.S. city of Minneapolis early on Friday while covering the unrest sparked by the death of a black man at the hands of law enforcement. Now, the crew was later released. The network posted footage of correspondent Omar Jimenez speaking calmly to police with batons and riot helmets and then being handcuffed and taken away. Take a look.
Right now, give us a second, guys. We can move back to where you we can move back to where you'd like here. We are live on the air at the moment. This is the 4 of us. We are one team. Just put us back where you want us. We are getting out of your way, so just let us know. Wherever you'd want us, we will go. We are just getting out of your way when you're advancing through the intersection. So just let us know, and we got you. And this is a scene here playing out in Minneapolis. This is part of the advanced police presence that we saw come over the course of really minutes when the local police showed up at the fire department, or with the fire department, I should say, on that building we showed you that was burning. This is among the State Patrol unit that was advancing up the street, saying and scattering the protesters at that point for people to clear the area. And so we walked away. I'm sorry?
You're under arrest.
Okay. Do you mind telling me why I'm under arrest, sir? Why am I under arrest, sir?
Officer's with CNN and he's on the air right now.
Okay.
You are arresting him live on CNN. We told you before that we are with CNN.
If you're just tuning in, you are watching our correspondent, Omar Jimenez, being arrested by state police in Minnesota. We're not sure why our correspondent is being arrested.
Hang on one second, Allison. Let's listen into what these officers are saying. That is an American television reporter, Omar Jimenez, being led away by police officers.
Now, CNN said a producer and a camera operator working with Jimenez were also arrested. Earlier, as Minnesota State Police surrounded Jimenez while he reported, the correspondent spoke to the officers, as you saw, and he said he wanted to cooperate. Jimenez was back on the air later Friday after police released him. CNN said Minnesota Governor Tim Walz apologized to the network. Earlier, CNN put out a statement condemning the police behavior. Jimenez was in the city covering the third straight night of unrest triggered by the death of George Floyd after he was arrested on suspicion of using a counterfeit banknote. A video taken by a bystander shows an officer kneeling on his neck as he is pinned to the ground. At one point, Floyd is heard saying he cannot breathe, and eventually his body goes limp. Meanwhile, Keisha Lance Bottoms, mayor of Atlanta, said the demonstrations triggered by the death of the handcuffed African-American detained by the police are not Atlanta. Take a look.
So what I see happening on the streets of Atlanta is not Atlanta. This is not a protest. This is not in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. This is chaos. A protest has purpose. When Dr. King was assassinated, we didn't do this to our city. You are disgracing our city. You are disgracing the life of George Floyd and every other person who has been killed in this country. We are better than this. We're better than this as a city. We are better than this as a country.
This is crazy.
Now, Ms. Bottoms also suggested that rioters in her city had unwittingly switched the conversational topic from the murder of an innocent man in Minnesota to the destruction of property in Atlanta as damage being done to CNN's headquarters flashed across television screens worldwide. Protests and acts of vandalism and looting were underway in multiple cities across the country following the death in police custody of George Floyd, the unarmed black forgery suspect, earlier this week in Minneapolis. Police formed a barricade and they kept the protesters at bay for quite a while, and then the protesters took a destructive turn. Shortly after 8 p.m., protesters started smashing the doors of the CNN. Then they moved to parked police cruisers and began jumping on the cars, smashing the windows, and eventually setting a police cruiser on fire. Meanwhile, a Minneapolis policeman accused of killing the unarmed African-American George Floyd by kneeling on his neck was taken into custody Friday and charged with third-degree murder, according to officials. Derek Chauvin is one of 4 officers who were fired shortly after an explosive video emerged showing a handcuffed Floyd lying on the street as an officer identified as Chauvin pinned his knee to Floyd's neck for at least 5 minutes on Monday. The death of the 46-year-old Floyd has sparked days of violent demonstrations in Minneapolis and other U.S. cities over police brutality against African Americans. In this graphic video footage, Floyd is seen saying that he cannot breathe. He was seen saying that he cannot breathe. Eventually, he went silent and limp, and he was later declared dead. Protests swelled after federal authorities said Thursday that they were making the case a top priority, but announced no arrests at that time. Overnight demonstrations broke through law enforcement barriers to overtake the Minneapolis police station, where the 4 officers blamed for Floyd's death were based. A fire broke out and soon became an inferno that engulfed the structure. Minnesota's National Guard announced that 500 troops were being deployed Friday for peacekeeping amid signs that the anger was nowhere near dissipating. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump said he has talked with the family of George Floyd, the African-American man who died while a policeman kneeled on his neck during the arrest. sparking riots across the country. Take a look.
Much appreciate it. I want to express our nation's deepest condolences and most heartfelt sympathies to the family of George Floyd. A terrible event, terrible, terrible thing that happened. I've asked that the Department of Justice expedite the federal investigation into his death and do it immediately, do it as quickly as absolutely possible. It should never happen, should never be allowed to happen, a thing like that. But we're determined that justice be served. And I spoke to members of the family, terrific people, and will be reporting as time goes by. We think that we also have to make the statement, and it's very important that we have peaceful protesters and support the rights for peaceful protesters. We can't allow a situation like happened in Minneapolis to descend further into lawless anarchy and chaos, and we understand that very well. It's very important, I believe, to the family, to everybody, that the memory of George Floyd be a perfect memory. Let it be a perfect memory. The looters should not be allowed to drown out the voices of so many peaceful protesters. They hurt so badly. People have really been through a lot. The family of George is entitled to justice, and the people of Minnesota are entitled to live in safety.
The 46-year-old Floyd's relatives, who spoke Friday with President Trump, welcomed the news of the arrest as a step on the road to justice. But they said they hoped for tougher charges and action against the other officers involved in Floyd's detention and death. All four were fired from the police department Tuesday after a video surfaced of Monday's arrest. The announcement of charges came hours after hundreds of troops were deployed to the streets of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Meanwhile, these violent clashes here and multiple arrests were made outside a police station in Boston during the Black Lives Matter demonstration. The commotion outside Boston's District D4 Back Bay South End Fenway Station on Harrison Avenue happened 3 hours after protesters gathered at a park in Boston's South End to protest the death of George Floyd. The Boston protests come just hours after Minnesota state prosecutors charged Derek Chauvin with third-degree murder and second-degree manslaughter for the death of Floyd. Floyd's death is reminiscent of the demise of Eric Garner, who died in police custody in New York in 2014. As demonstrators gathered on Thursday in Denver over the killing of a black man by a white policeman in Minnesota, a driver was filmed maneuvering and running over a protester. The protester is first seen on the bonnet of the car and then jumping off before the driver swerves and hits him. Take a look. President Trump said he would strip several of Hong Kong's special privileges with the U.S. and bar some Chinese students from U.S. universities in anger over Beijing's bid to exert control in the financial hub. In a White House appearance that President Trump had teased for a day, the U.S. president attacked China over its treatment of the former British colony, saying it was diminishing the city's long-standing and proud status. Take a look.
Today, I will issue a proclamation to better secure our nation's vital university research and to suspend the entry of certain foreign nationals from China who we have identified as potential security risks. I am also taking action to protect the integrity of America's financial system, by far the best in the world. I am instructing my presidential working group on financial markets to study the differing practices of Chinese companies listed on the U.S. financial markets with the goal of protecting American investors. investment firms should not be subjecting their clients to the hidden and undue risks associated with financing Chinese companies that do not play by the same rules. Americans are entitled to fairness and transparency. Several of the most significant actions we're taking pertain to deeply troubling situations unfolding in Hong Kong. This week, China unilaterally imposed control over Hong Kong's security. This was a plain violation of Beijing's treaty obligations with the United Kingdom in the Declaration of 1984 and explicit provisions of Hong Kong's Basic Law. It has 27 years to go. China's latest incursion, along with other recent developments that degraded the territory's freedoms, makes clear that Hong Kong is no longer sufficiently autonomous to warrant the special treatment that we have afforded the territory since the handover. China has replaced its promised formula of one country, two systems with one country, one system.
In the run-up to Britain returning Hong Kong to China in 1997, a one-country, two-systems deal was forged to allow the city to maintain certain freedoms and autonomy for 50 years. Now, those liberties include a free market economy, an independent judiciary, free speech, and legislative autonomy. As a result, many countries, including the United States, brought in laws that allowed them to treat Hong Kong as a separate trade entity to the authoritarian and economically restrictive mainland. The arrangement allowed Hong Kong to flourish into a world-class financial center on a par with London and New York. Reciprocal visa-free travel deals, a dollar-pegged currency, the world's fourth-largest stock exchange, as well as business-friendly laws, taxes, and legal protections greased the wheels of commerce.
Especially during the coronavirus pandemic, the U.S. has been rather weak in opposing Beijing's encroachment on Hong Kong. So this is a very significant move. So, but whatever measure the U.S. takes, that would affect Hong Kong economy. And if there are escalation, if there are rounds of sanctions or retaliation between China and America, I think Hong Kong's economy and Hong Kong's people will suffer quite a lot. Because Hong Kong is the main source of foreign direct investment and foreign currency, and those are really essential to maybe to the survival of the Chinese regime. So the Hong Kong people believe in that. The Chinese people believe, and also the Americans also think this is one of the weakest point of China. Hong Kong is simply put, Hong Kong is more valuable to China than to the U.S. That's why if you are trying to impose some economic or financial sanction to Hong Kong, that would actually affect the lifeline of Beijing. Maybe they are a little bit over optimistic because there will be the rounds of retaliation and the escalation, and that may mean the even tightening of the political situation in Hong Kong, and also some possible economic hardship in Hong Kong.
The one country, two system approach has practically ended a number of years ago when the Hong Kong government and the Chinese governments refused to honor the high degree of autonomy for the people of Hong Kong. So I would consider it that this is not the end of the one country, two system, but that process has started much earlier before. The Beijing leadership wants to end the protests in Hong Kong that has been lasting since last June, and it's very embarrassing for Beijing to have this going on and on without an end. That is the second reason why it wants to, another message that it is sending to the Hong Kong people: end this protest immediately, or some people, activists, organizers, and ordinary protesters are going to suffer. But in any case, the cost of protest and dissent would go up. And that is the aim of Beijing, driving up the cost of dissent to stop the protests. It is likely that the law will be written in very general language, and the language would be used and interpreted by the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government to suppress political speech and activities, making all kinds of protests and dissent, or people participated in protests and dissent, vulnerable to arrest, prosecution, and even imprisonment. Because Hong Kong people, in their quest for democracy, they surely cannot do it on their own. They need help from the international community. But whether the international community can actually put pressure on Beijing to relieve the pressure on the Hong Kong people, I'm skeptical. But I also think that Beijing has put this into the calculation, that the United States may do so, taking away the trade and other economic privilege of Hong Kong and treating Hong Kong as just another city like Shanghai or Beijing or elsewhere, or just another Chinese city. But they probably, the leadership probably look at that possibility and feel that in the long run, the damage would not be that great.
Meanwhile, the European Union said that China's imposition of a security law on Hong Kong had damaged ties with Beijing, but that imposing sanctions would not solve the crisis. Take a look.
So, what the situation? U.S.-China rivalry is becoming a structuring factor of the post-coronavirus world. This is becoming more assertive, more controversial. And we agreed in our meeting on the need to reinforce a policy based on our interests and on our principles. That it is impossible to put our relationship with China into a single box. It's too much complex. It doesn't fit in a single category. There is an ally or a rival, there is a partner or a competitor. It's both. It's difficult to imagine that we can solve the world climate challenge without a strong partnership between Europe and China. China is still a little bit less than 30% of the world emissions. We express our grave concern at the steps taken by China on the 28th of May. We believe that this risk to seriously undermine the one country, two systems principle on the high degree of autonomy of the special administrative region of Hong Kong, and China agreed with United Kingdom when United Kingdom withdraw from Hong Kong. We want also to stress that our relationships with China are based on mutual respect and trust, and I want to underline this: mutual respect and trust. But this decision calls into this question, and I think that we will have to raise the issue in our continued dialogue with China.
China's President Xi Jinping is due to meet the EU's 27 leaders in Leipzig in September. Mr. Borrell said the timetable of the meeting might yet change due to the coronavirus pandemic. The cautious EU statement came after the US, Britain, Canada, and Australia issued stern criticism of the planned law, which would punish secession and subversion of state power in Hong Kong. Chinese security agencies will also be allowed to operate openly in Hong Kong, which has been an autonomous territory under its own basic law within China under the terms of its handover from Britain in 1997. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the UK will improve the rights of British nationals overseas. Passport holders, a status offered to many Hong Kong residents if China goes ahead. And the U.S. has revoked the special status conferred on Hong Kong under its own diplomatic rules paving the way for the territory to be stripped of trading and economic privileges. Eagle News will be right back. President Trump said he was severing U.S. ties with the World Health Organization, which he says failed to do enough to combat the initial spread of the novel coronavirus. President Trump first suspended funding to the UN agency a month ago, accusing it of mismanaging its handling of the global pandemic. Then 10 days ago, he accused the Geneva-based WHO of being a puppet of China and said the funding freeze would become permanent unless it made substantive improvements. Take a look.
Or swept aside. The world is now suffering as a result of the malfeasance of the Chinese government. China's cover-up of the Wuhan virus allowed the disease to spread all over the world, instigating a global pandemic that has cost more than 100,000 American lives and over 1 million lives worldwide. Chinese officials ignored their reporting obligations to the World Health Organization and pressured the World Health Organization to mislead the world when the virus was first discovered by Chinese authorities. Countless lives have been taken and profound economic hardship has been inflicted all around the globe. They strongly recommended against me doing the early ban from China, but I did it anyway and was proven to be 100% correct. China has total control over the World Health Organization, despite only paying $40 million per year, compared to what the United States has been paying, which is approximately $450 million a year. We have detailed the reforms that it must make and engage with them directly, but they have refused to act. Because they have failed to make the requested and greatly needed reforms, we will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization and redirecting those funds to other worldwide and deserving urgent global public health needs. The world needs answers from China on the virus. We must have transparency.
Beijing has furiously denied U.S. allegations that it played down or even covered up the threat from the virus after it was detected in the Chinese city of Wuhan in December, insisting it has been forthcoming. The pandemic has since claimed almost 364,000 lives globally, and the number of cases is nearing 6 million. The U.S. recorded 1,225 coronavirus deaths on Friday, bringing its total to 102,798 since the global pandemic began, according to a tally kept by Johns Hopkins University. The country has officially logged 1,745,606 overall cases of the virus, far more than any other nation. The Baltimore-based university's tracker showed at 8:30 p.m. or 00:30 GMT Saturday. Now, earlier this week, the UN Health Agency launched a new independently run foundation for private donations, which the organization hopes will give it greater control to direct philanthropic and public donations toward pressing problems such as the coronavirus crisis. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the creation of the new foundation was not related to President Trump's threat.
As I said earlier, this had started more than 2 years ago, and it came from one of our colleagues, actually. As I said, it was, I have this, what I call open door, open hour every Thursday in the afternoon, and our staff come and see me to tell me any ideas they have to improve our organization, to talk to me, to give me advice. So that's how we got this idea. I think in order to improve flexibility, we need to have additional resources and unearmarked resources, and this is a good solution, and we have to pursue. We want also additional funding because based on the transformation we had, we need to invest more in programs, especially if you take the healthy population, one of the pillars we have, which is least funded. And this idea helps us, the WHO Foundation, to increase the volume too, the quantity, so we can expand our programs.
Meanwhile, states and communities across the United States continued phased reopenings. In New York, the U.S. city worst hit by the coronavirus, is on track to start reopening the week of June 8, according to Governor Andrew Cuomo. Let's listen in.
The reason we are so rigorous about this is because many states and countries have reopened and they made mistakes. Yes, everybody wants to open tomorrow. I wanted to open before we ever closed. But you have to be smart, and we've seen what has happened painfully when cities and states and countries reopened too quickly. They wound up closing again, which is the worst situation. So be smart. We have the data. We have more data than almost any other place on the globe because of our testing. And we have had it reviewed at every level. So I feel confident that we can rely on this data, and the 5 regions that have been in phase 1 can now move to phase 2 because their data has been reviewed, and the experts say to us it's safe to move forward because people have been smart and you haven't seen the spike. So they go to phase 2. Phase 2 is all office-based jobs, real estate services, retail reopening, barbershops, hair salons reopening. That's all part of phase 2. There's specific guidance on how to reopen in phase 2. It's not just open the doors and everybody has a party. It's 50% occupancy in office buildings, signage on markers, etc., no meetings without social distancing. Don't share food or beverage. Retail stores, 50% occupancy, wear the face covering. A store owner can tell you they don't want you to come in if you're not wearing a face covering. Why? Because you don't have the right to infect the store owner. You don't have a right to infect other customers. Barbershops, hair salons are open by appointment only. The professionals in those operations have to get a test every 2 weeks. We recommend that the professionals get a test before they reopen. That's not a mandate, that's a recommendation. And we recommend to customers to ask the barber or professional in the hair salon if they had a test before you use their services.
The governor has warned that parts of the state could be shut down again if the reopening sparks a second wave of cases. Governor Cuomo ordered all non-essential businesses closed from March 22 as New York State quickly found itself at the epicenter of America's deadly coronavirus outbreak. And to Ireland now, where it is starting a new no-deal preparation as the Brexit trade talks falter. Joining us live from Ireland is Rowena Bianca Arino. Hello, Bianca. How are you?
Hi, Alma.
Hi, Bianca. Good to see you back. What are your updates from Ireland?
Ireland is setting up preparations for a no-deal split with Britain at the end of the year as talks to broker a post-Brexit trade agreement are thundering. Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, let's hear more about it.
While the government is prioritising COVID, we haven't forgotten about Brexit either. And among the things we agreed to do was to continue to step up no-deal planning. That's no trade deal planning in case we get into that position at the end of the year. As we all know, Brexit hasn't gone away, and talks are intensifying at a European level with a view to an EU-UK seminar next month in June. So very little progress in reality being made on those talks.
We really understand that as companies are getting up and running again, to remind them of the challenge of Brexit is a really big ask. And the Taoiseach, myself and Minister Humphreys will continue to work closely together to see what guidance and what support we can offer to help companies get ready for that challenge.
So according to Irish Times, negotiations between UK and EU on a trade deal show little signs of progress. So the Taoiseach, the Deputy Prime Minister, and Minister of the Climate, Simon Coveney, will brief the Cabinet on the state of the negotiations in Brussels and tell ministers the need of preparations at ports and airports to be stepped up as Ireland emerges from the coronavirus lockdown. Mr. Coveney will outline two potential scenarios that could unfold the second half of the year. Either the two sides reach a free trade agreement that includes zero tariffs and zero social standards, or the failed to reach agreement in which it takes no deal Brexit will come into operation at the beginning of 2021. If there is a no-deal Brexit, ministers will be told Irish agri-food exports to the UK could be hit with some $1 billion in tax. The UK must decide at the end of June if it wishes to seek an extension to the present transition phase, during which, although legally outside the EU, the UK applies the laws and receives the benefits of the EU's single market. However, the UK government has said it will not, under any circumstances, apply for an extension, meaning there are just 7 months left to reach a comprehensive free trade agreement. Such a process normally takes several years. There has been little progress so far in the negotiations, which began in March, and Mr. Coveney is likely to offer a gloomy prognosis to ministers when they meet today. Of the 4 negotiating rounds scheduled to take place before the end of June, 3 have been completed, but they have achieved little agreement on anything of substance. The next round starts next week. Ministers will also be asked to approve the drafting of new Brexit legislation to prepare for no deal, though it is unlikely to be presented to the Dáil before the autumn. On some more light news, opera singer Edgar Montvidas took the streets of South London on Thursday evening to add a new spin to the weekly Clapper Cares event. This to recognize the frontliners of the state-run health service. Let's hear from the singer himself.
Cuando es para ti, sole se ne scende, bene quasi la melancolia. No tengo otra cosa que darte que un ramo de rosas. Cosa de rosas, sta in fronte a te.
And also, I miss my audience. I miss singing. You know, I've been sort of not singing since March, really. And you know, when they started to cancel performances, and I knew Jason, and he invited me. He said, you know, would you like to sort of do that? I said, absolutely, yes. So we sort of with one stone, we killed, I killed two birds because I have an opportunity to perform for the audience, and we also sort of getting some money for good purpose for NHS. Oh, it's lovely. No, it's gorgeous. I think that people also missing, live music, and all these broadcasts and streaming online will never really replace live performance. And then they can see, opera singer walking down the street and then singing with a bike. I think it's exciting, and it was exciting for me. Of course, it was the first time I've done this.
And volunteers from Critical and Nissan on Floyd to help raise money for the charity, which provides food and provisions for care workers. Back to you, Alma.
Right. Thank you very much, Bianca, for your report. Thank you so much. We enjoyed that.
Thank you, Alma. Take that away. Minneapolis, from Republic of Ireland, and we live in interesting times.
All right, joining us live from Barcelona, Spain is Lynn Tumbaga Diaz. Hello, Lynn.
Hi, Alma.
Good to see you back. How are you doing?
I'm feeling good.
Oh, that's
Thank you.
good. Okay, so what are the updates from Barcelona?
Okay. The de-escalation plan designed to ease the lockdown in Spain has 4 phases. Now, Barcelona residents are enjoying the activities included in phase 1. This includes opening of shopping centers, but with limited people who can enter the shops to ensure social distancing. Customers were asked to fall in line outside the shops to prevent lots of people inside, so they can follow the safety measures designed for shopping stores. Clothing and accessory shops allow only 30 people inside to prevent overcrowding. Small businesses to reopen under strict safety conditions. Hair salons are also back to business. Hairdressers and other businesses that offer service by appointment can reopen. Trains, buses, and other public transportations are also operating, but must follow guidelines set to prevent the spread of COVID-19 disease, such as wearing of masks and gloves. The offer program by TMB for the metro and the bus adapts to each phase of the de-escalation and increases as the boundary progresses. The outside seating areas of bars and restaurants are allowed to open at 50% capacity, modified from the original 30%. Local councils have the power to grant more space to the terraces than normal. Children and elders can also go out of their houses to exercise, but children are still not allowed to play in the public playground. Beaches reopened with relaxed restrictions to allow people to stroll or exercise. The City Council announced that individual exercise and walks will also be allowed from 8 o'clock in the morning to 11 p.m. The slot previously set aside for members of sports clubs only. Sunbathing and practicing any sport in groups are still prohibited. Meanwhile, in Andorra, another country in Europe situated between France and Spain in the Pyrenees Mountains, it's known for its ski resort and a tax haven status that encourages duty-free shopping. There were also cases of COVID-19 disease in this country. That is why the residents are required to undergo COVID-19 testing. The Andorra government has set up testing centers near residents' houses. The tests were done twice and results were sent to their mobile phones 1 day after the test. According to the libermercado.com, with just 77,747 inhabitants, Andorra is going to become the first country in the world to test the coronavirus for the entire population. They will do 2 tests to each citizens at no cost to them. The Andorran government announced a plan which started on May 4, on which will consist of making a massive test at all its inhabitants. Once done, they will wait 15 days to repeat it and control the pandemic. Back to you, Alma.
All right, very good. Thank you so much, Lynn. Enjoy the reopening, the phase 1 level now. Thank you so much for your report, Lynn.
Thank you for having me. From Barcelona, Spain, I'm Lynn Bautista Tumbaga Diaz, and we live in interesting times.
Meanwhile, sad news, an infant has died from the coronavirus in Switzerland. Its first child fatality from the pandemic, according to authorities. Take a look. Now, Switzerland registered 2 new virus deaths in the past 24 hours, one of which was the infant, according to Stefan Custer, the new head of the country's coronavirus crisis response. He said the infant had been treated at a Zurich hospital, but didn't say whether it had suffered from pre-existing medical conditions. According to the Swiss Health Ministry, the child was infected with the coronavirus abroad without providing further details. According to the ATS news agency, 2 other school-aged children, a brother and a sister, contracted the virus near Basel, forcing 70 people into isolation. Switzerland has now registered more than 30,700 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 1,656 deaths. Eagle News will be right back. Welcome back. Carmaker Renault said that it would cut nearly 15,000 jobs, including 4,600 at its core French operations, as it seeks to steer out of a cash crunch exacerbated by the coronavirus crisis. Take a look.
Et là, ce que nous recherchons, c'est bien entendu des réductions de frais de structure. Ce n'est pas un plan de fermeture de site, c'est un plan d'économie globale et cohérent. Chaque décision, chaque mesure d'économie a été longuement soupesée, en pensant aux salariés que, bien entendu, ces décisions pourraient troubler.
Thousands of people have gathered in front of the Renault plant in Maubeuge, which has been shut down since Friday, to demonstrate against the car manufacturer's decision to cut 15,000 jobs worldwide, including 4,600 in France. The company said will target savings of more than 2 billion euros over 3 years and turn its focus to electric vehicles as it seeks to restore competitiveness in a market reeling from slumping sales since the COVID-19 pandemic forced millions of people into home confinement for weeks on end. Renault had been navigating turbulent waters even before the health crisis, starting with the shock arrest of its former boss, Carlos Ghosn, on financial misconduct charges in 2018, which led to deep rifts in its alliance with Japanese partners Nissan and Mitsubishi. Meanwhile, workers staged a protest at Nissan's Barcelona plant as the Japanese car maker has decided to shut the factory where 3,000 people are employed. Nissan's chief executive had informed it of its plan to stop operations at the Barcelona site, which groups several production facilities. Let's listen in.
As of today, the utilization of the plant remains very low because it's around 20%. And when we make an estimation, we were making an estimation for the incoming years, that level of utilization was supposed to go further down. And through the studies, we discovered that even the allocation of a new model, taking into account the current overall market situation, was not making the utilization of the plant sustainable. This is a decision that takes into account all the possible elements that we have to evaluate. Of course, we will enter now into a phase of consultation with all the stakeholders involved to analyze the best way of proceeding on. But as of today, we do consider that there is no viable solution going forward.
Esto no es un plan de hoy, ni de ayer, ni del año pasado. Esto es un plan establecido hace muchos años. Nos han dejado ir muriendo por inanición. Y no es que esta planta no sea rentable. Ninguna planta es rentable si no tiene volumen. Lo que sucede es que aquí nos han dejado morir. ¿Vale? Entonces ahora, en estos momentos, además de esta pandemia del COVID, Me parece que es una auténtica vergüenza.
Japanese car maker Nissan has decided to shut its factory in Barcelona, where 3,000 people are employed after 4 decades of operations, according to the Spanish government. The decision came despite government efforts to keep the plant open. Spain is one of the countries worst hit by the coronavirus fallout, a context that particularly stoked anger among workers at the Barcelona plant. Spain's car industry is the European Union's second biggest after that of Germany, accounting for 10% of the country's gross domestic product. With Brexit, the Barcelona site became Nissan's main one in the European Union. The Japanese company runs a bigger production facility in Sunderland in Britain. In addition to 3,000 direct jobs, some 22,000 more depend indirectly on the site, according to unions. Meanwhile, World Bank Group President David Malpass detailed the impacts of COVID-19 on developing countries, saying they were experiencing a double impact, vulnerable to health risks, but also suffering from a lack of resources to protect their economies. Take a look.
It's a double impact. They're vulnerable to the pandemic, to COVID-19 itself, and people are dying in the countries. But then this added problem is they just don't have the resources and the capacity in order to protect their economies. So what we are trying to do is create programs that are as helpful as possible to the countries. And this means tailoring the programs to different countries. Some of the countries have the ability to pass cash to people, to poor people, through a safety net that's similar to what advanced countries have. So in those cases, we can put money through those systems, and it really keeps people out of extreme poverty. One problem is that the governments of developing countries are seeing their revenues go down a lot. That's their tax revenues and their revenues from tariffs, from trade, for example. And so what that means is whatever level of debt they had prior to the crisis is more burdensome. So we're addressing that by providing more resources, by the moratorium on payments that we talked about earlier. The G20 countries, the biggest countries, have been generous in saying that the poorest countries don't need to pay them back for their official debt. That saves money for the developing country, but also means that new investments have some breathing room in order to grow going forward. As countries think about how to build back, having a lower carbon footprint is an opportunity. Oil prices are low now. It's a chance for people to change their systems and improve their systems so that they work better in the future. But I think we have to recognize the reality that with the world entering a severe recession, there's urgency in these tasks that I've talked about because the poverty levels are rising. It's the first time since 1998, that was the Asian crisis, the first time now, again, that the poverty levels are going up instead of down, and that has severe consequences. So that drives the World Bank forward, and I hope drives the developing countries forward to create a better, stronger environment.
Even with some positive economic signs in countries like France, the International Labour Organization warned of the global fallout among young workers who have lost jobs because of the pandemic. Take a look.
I think there are three messages that we're giving out in this monitor. The first is that our global estimates for the employment impact of the pandemic is 305 million. It's the same figure we gave out last time. So I think we can see that we have a clear idea of what the overall job price has been of the pandemic. But then we're looking very specifically, and this is the second message, at the situation of young people. And it's hardly a surprise. We see that young people have been the hardest and the quickest hit on the labour market, starting already from a very bad place on labour markets. We've seen that no less than 1 in 6, slightly more than 1 in 6 young people who were in work at the beginning of the pandemic are no longer working. This is a dramatic situation. But there are two more things affecting young people. One is the interruption of their education and training. We have seen this has happened on a very large scale, to such an extent that 50% of young people don't know when they'll be able to complete their training. 10% think that they will never complete their training. So this is a second hit on young people. And the third, of course, is that in this always difficult entry to the labour market at the end of education, for many young people, there's nowhere to go in a lockdown economy. So the danger is, if you put these three things together, that we are creating a lockdown generation of young people who might face permanent or at least long-term consequences for this dramatic situation. And the last message is about testing and tracing. The World Health Organization insists very strongly, for good medical reasons, that we need to really focus on testing and tracing those who are affected by COVID-19. What we show in our monitor is that where you do that testing and tracing, you get a positive impact on the labour market. That is to say, the loss of jobs is limited if you do more testing and tracing. Why? Because you can then rely less on lockdowns, you give people more confidence as consumers, investors and entrepreneurs, and thirdly, of course, it's easier to come back to work. You can do this with greater knowledge, so you can get started that much more easily.
And finally in our news, here's the last but not the least of a 3-part series feature on how to make floral arrangements of different shapes and sizes while staying at home during these trying times. Brought to you once again by our EBC Bureau's Lemmy Aligado. Take a look.
But if your roses are drying and you don't know what to do, don't throw it away. You can reuse the petals, as you can use it in your potpourri, as make it potpourri and put in your bathroom or in your bathtub. But the best way to remove all the petals, normally we do it each one, but the easiest way is to just grab in the back, twist, and then here you go. These are all your petals. Now let's do a flower arrangement for this vessel. By the way, all these greeneries are from our yard, so you can get a lot of greeneries, and the grass also. This is very useful. Sometimes you don't pay attention to this, but you have a lot in your yard. Just go outside your house and go look for greeneries or foliages, then you can utilize in your flower arrangement. Now we're gonna start with the roses. We'll do arrangement. I'll just stick flowers, the roses. The focal point in this arrangement will be these roses. But make sure on this floral foam, once you take out your flower, don't put it back where you get it from, because it's gonna have a lot of air on the foam, because this is a wet foam. We soak this foam, that means there's a lot of water, and the water will absorb, goes into the flowers, and it's gonna be hydrated, well hydrated. So you can see all this pink, big pink flower there, roses. Now, what we're gonna do next is, this is the first layer here. Now I want to reuse some of this as to cover the stem. Okay. Whatever decide length you want, go ahead and do it. In flower arrangement, it doesn't have to be perfect. If you're interested on something, or you're very fascinated on doing something, give it a try. Especially now that you're staying home, maybe you can practice. Just pick up flowers from your yard, then practice. Just keep practicing. Now I'm sticking all this baby's breath around I'm trying to cover the stem of the flower arrangement. You can see now first layer is the roses. We're creating a second layer, which is the baby spread. And guess what we're gonna put on the bottom? Any idea? We have to put the greeneries. That's where the purpose of this greeneries to cover the stem or the flower foam. Now these are from my yard, so you can utilize all this here. Some they asking which one we're gonna put first, the greeneries, the fillers, or the flower itself. It's up to you. Okay, and this is gonna be the drama of this arrangement. You know the grass I was talking about earlier, just growing from your yard. Maybe just pick it. So, voila! This is our flower arrangement. Okay, and one more that I'm gonna show it to you, the DIY. If you have a lot of foliages, like the family of Monstera leaf, only need a clear glass vase, specifically the vertical one, the tall one, depending on the height of your ceiling of your house. That if you have a big house or tall ceiling, I would suggest to have this. Just this one centerpiece, and it changed the whole room. I just cut this from my yard, front yard, and then just stick them inside. Inside there is my container, and then that's it. All right, till next time. Hope you enjoy and you learn something from my DIY in flower arrangement. Bye.
Thank you, Lemmy. In time of physical and emotional distance, we give importance to the unsung service delivered by our frontliners, our news correspondents positioned all over the world. Without them, we would not have the eagle-eye focus on the facts of this pandemic and its continuing repercussions on our lives. To our international correspondents, thank you for staying in touch with our viewers. Stay safe, protect yourselves and others. Good night. I'm Alma Angeles. We live in interesting times.